What's up, Dungeon Masters? Do you guys want to run some one-shots with some Dungeons and Dragons? I mean, how often do you get to do that? Well, if you pick up this Dragon Delves book, you can do it 10 different times. So today, we're talking about the first adventure in the Dragon Delves book for 2024 D&D, Death at Sunset. It's a dragon adventure for level 1 and 2 adventurers, and they're gonna go and investigate why corruption has returned to a forest where a green dragon was slain over a century ago. Now, are your players gonna die from this one shot? Maybe. Let's find out as we talk about this book and the review. Hey everybody, I'm Sir Pinkbeard, and why should you give a fuck about what I have to say? I've been a DM for about 3 years now. I've been mostly doing 2014, but as 2024's come out, my DM groups have switched to that. So I want to make sure that if you're buying the new adventure modules and you're spending money on this hobby, that you're getting the most out of what you are buying. Now this should go without saying because you're watching a video on the adventure beats of here, but if you care about spoilers for this adventure, or you're a player who's going to play in this adventure, stop watching. Don't watch this video. Come back after you've played it and see if you agree with me. But I'm definitely going to be talking about this, so major spoilers. So actually, this is a new series. I'm going to be running and testing and reviewing all 10 adventures in this Dragon Delves book. And honestly, it's gonna be a great time, I think. But to make sure that it's a great time and to make sure that it's worth your money, here's how we're gonna do it. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the book. We're gonna talk about what you need in order to run these adventures, as well as what might be useful to know before running Death at Sunset specifically. And after we've covered that and the actual story beats of Death at Sunset's level 1 and 2 adventure, then I'm gonna pause the video, go run the campaign, come back here, and tell you how it went. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So just as a fair warning, I am going to be recommending quite a few products in this video, and it's not because I'm trying to sell you something, it's because I personally use these products and things, and I think they help make me a better DM, and they've helped make my players' experiences at my table overall better. And so if you're turned off by that, I'm sorry. I just want to let you know that I'm not trying to be a shill, I'm just telling you the things that I use. So while the Dragon Delves book does have everything that you need to know about the adventure, it doesn't have everything that you need to run the adventure with. So in order to run the adventure well, you actually need 3 additional books in true Wizards of the Coast fashion. You need the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. You also need the 2024 Monster Manual, and you'll also need the 2024 Player Handbook. I mean, your players need this more than you do, but you still probably want it to adjudicate any rules that might come up. So once you have those, you should be really good to go. Like, you can have the additional books if you want to, but this book doesn't require that you have any of the other additional 2024 supplements. However, while that may be what you need to actually run the game, I do think there are some things that are nice to have that will make running the game a better experience for everyone. And those are an initiative tracker and a Chessex mini mat. Now, you don't need the mega mat because, at least for Death at Sunset, there's only about 25 to 23 squares of actual movement, so you don't need anything bigger than that. If you do not have one of these mats, I've got a link in the description that will help pick one of these up. I think these are the best mats that you can use for the 5x5 grid, especially if you're playing a lot of D&D. Now, if you have one of these, but you don't have one of these, let me tell you what, these will actually change your life and make your job as the DM a lot easier. I was skeptical at first, to be honest, but this initiative tracker allows you to write down the players' names in dry erase, and then also the enemies' names in dry erase. And because these things slot out, you can adjust them as need be. Now, the real benefit to this initiative tracker is letting your players run it, because you as the DM have a lot of combats, and Death at Sunset specifically has a lot of combats. You don't want to be constantly rewriting down the players' names and their initiative scores, and honestly, with all the stat blocks that you're going to have to do, it's probably just better to offload some of that stuff. So this initiative tracker, there's also a link for it in the description, but I think that this will make the overall experience better, and I personally use this on my weekly games. The final thing I think is better is minis. Now, this mini is the Wildspire Dragon mini, and this dragon does not appear in these books, but the point is, with minis, minis that I think Theater of the Mind is great, but having a physical representation of the monster to help players who either don't have an imagination or don't have a very good imagination, help them see and feel connected to what's going on, especially if you're using the game mat and these adventures are set up to use a game mat. I think having a mini is absolutely worth it. So I've probably got some minis on my Amazon store, but I don't have anything specifically. Just check out your local game store and pick up some of the things they have there. Now, with the materials out of the way, let's talk about the knowledge that you need to have in order to run this adventure well. Death at Sunset has 18 different stat blocks, which honestly feels like a lot for something that's supposed to take 1, maybe 2 sessions. Because when I run combats, I don't run that many monsters or potential monsters in a given adventuring day. But Death at Sunset has that, and you don't want your combats to feel repetitive. You don't want them to feel like you're fighting the same monster over and over again, even though the stat block might be slightly different. But how do you do that when you have 18 different potential fights or 18 different things that you're fighting? Well, personally, I use the monsters know what they're doing. Now, almost every time I run a new monster, I check in with this book because this book has some fantastic advice on how these monsters actually fight. The Dragon Delves book will tell you, hey, this is when the monsters will run away. This is when the monsters will engage in combat. But it will not tell you how those monsters actually fight. And unfortunately, because the way 5e and 5.5 are written, that information is left a lot up to the DM. So if you want your combats to be very memorable and stick in your players' minds beyond just, oh yeah, we fought some bugs and some zombies and a dragon here or there, if you want them to remember the fight, I highly recommend picking this up. This has helped me significantly. Or not. I'm not your dad. You do what you want. The final thing you need to know before you run Death at Sunset is how green dragons work. They are conniving, arrogant, egotistical, manipulative bastards. A bit like my ex-wife, if I'm honest. I don't have an ex-wife. Sorry, love. You're fantastic and wonderful. The thing is, green dragons really are like huge pieces of shit. They are masters of double talk. They are masters of manipulation and making people afraid for their friends and family so that they do the bidding of the green dragon. And though green dragons amass followers, a lot of green dragons never actually encounter their followers in person. Those followers hear voices on the wind, or they get dreams at night, or they encounter a little mouse that happens to work for the green dragon. That's a fun lair action that's present in 5.5e and actually 5e too. But here's the thing. Green dragons learn how to do all this shit because when they are born, they watch their parents do this shit. Now, some of it's innate, like green dragons are just bad guys, and they're okay at being bad guys, but the true masters of manipulation have to learn from someone, and they learn from watching their parents, and then eventually, once they've amassed enough followers and gold, they set out on their own to be massive pieces of shit elsewhere. The thing is for this campaign, though, is that Death at Sunset does not have a daddy dragon or a mommy dragon to teach the little dragon wormling that you're going to fight and kill how to do any of this. So he's figuring it out as you go. So even though green dragons are the way that they are, this adventure doesn't necessarily use that same green dragon lore when setting up this adventure. And at first I was shocked, but after thinking about it, I think it really makes sense. Now here's the thing. I got a lot of that information on green dragons from this book, the 2024 Monster Manual. But this book doesn't have a lot of that. So if you happen to have the 5e Monster Manual, I highly recommend just reading up on the lore that they've got in there for green dragons, because I think it will also help you run the monster here at the end. And I think it'll make it a bit more just embellished and a better experience if you are reading and pulling the information from the previous monster manual, because like I said, this new one doesn't have a lot of information about how it should be run. So with all of that prerequisite information out of the way, let's now talk about the actual adventure and what your players are going to encounter as they run through this thing. Centuries ago, 6 quarreling elven families reconciled. Each family planted a redwood sapling in a circular grove to represent their newfound harmony. Decades later, after the saplings grew tall and mighty, an ancient green dragon dug a lair in the redwood's roots, poisoning the grove and the surrounding forest. The elves called the dragon Death at sunset, for twilight was always when the dragon descended on her prey. The dragon adopted this name, reveling in the terror it inspired and bellowing it just before rampaging. 100 years ago, though, an elf warrior named Ethvarn and her allies slew Death at sunset. Ethvarn, however, died in the assault. The surviving elves pulled back from the Redwood Grove, leaving only a few wardens in an outpost called Redwood Watch. And over the last few months, the inhabitants of Redwood Watch, now a village, have noticed the forest trees growing sickly. In the past month, 5 villagers have disappeared in the grove. The first was a council member named Armand Whisperwind. 4 villagers went searching for him, but none returned. Confused and terrified, the village's council has called for heroes to investigate. Death at Sunset begins at level 1 by the player showing up at Redwood Watch having answered the call of the counselors asking for adventurers to help them figure out what's going on. And when they get to that village, they're greeted by those counselors, one of whom is very concerned that somehow the dragon spirit is affecting the world, and the other who's very sure that dragons are not involved whatsoever. Now, quick note, you can skip this whole portion of the adventure. If you just want to go to level 2, you can just start at level 2. But if you're running it from level 1 like I am, at this point the players will be asked to go and investigate the Redwood Grove, particularly to bring back bark from each of the 6 trees so that the council members can study the bark and determine what the poison is and maybe make some antidotes from that. When the players go and investigate that, they'll discover zombies, bugs, even a dryad and some ghosts. And honestly, having worked through that area, making sure everything is fine, there's a few combat opportunities for them to go in and do. Each of those combat opportunities is kind of unique, and one should not necessarily trigger any of the others. I think that area is really well designed, but that's what the players can expect. At the Redwood Grove, though, you can see the big 20-foot wide section where Death at Sunset used to go into at night before she was slain by Ethvarn. Now, when the players bring back the bark, the book recommends that you level them up and give them some XP if you're doing XP, or just move them on. I'll be doing milestones, so we're just going to move them on to level 2. And once they're at level 2, they're going to need to go back and investigate and try to find the missing council member who is kind of rumored to be hanging around that big gaping hole in the ground. Now, when the players return to the Redwood Grove at level 2, or they start going there for the first time if you skipped the level 1 portion of this adventure, they'll enter into the Great Maw that Death at Sunset dug out that led to her lair. And when they do so, they'll encounter the 5 missing elves at different places within the path to get into the lair. Now, depending on how your players play and how heroic they're feeling in the moment, they might be able to save those elves, or they'll fight them to the death and just kind of end it. If they save it, the village back home will rejoice, and it'll be a joyful celebration, and they'll be treated as heroes. And if they kill them, well, just don't tell the villagers that you were the reason they died. That's up to you. I don't know how your players play. Murder hobos or murder hoboing. That's just how things go. Now, once they enter into the lair proper, there are some other monsters and minions that you can and will encounter, along with the final boss of this adventure, the little baby wormling, somewhere in the bones of its mother, a giant ancient green dragon skeleton that still has poisonous miasma going around it. Should the players survive this encounter, they'll get access to the dragon wormling's little hoard. It's a pretty good sum of coins, actually, plus the Dragon Slayer longsword that exists still in that hoard. Now, having talked about all of that, let's take a moment and talk about what I actually expect will happen in this campaign adventure, because honestly, dragons at level 2 is crazy. And even though these adventures are meant to be played with 4 to 6 people, the majority of them, I think at level 2, these players are screwed. So what do I actually expect to happen when I run this session? Well, truthfully, I think someone's gonna die. I cannot imagine throwing 4 to 6 players. Personally, I'm throwing 4 when I run this session, but I can't imagine throwing 4 to 6 players against a dragon at level 2 and one of them not dying. Now, there are some ways that they might survive. For example, the village of Redwood Watch has a little merchant who can offer them some healing potions and some additional gear. And if they do the first portion of the campaign adventure where they go and get the bark, they can get access to some antidotes, which will help with the poison condition. But if they don't do that, or they forget to do that, or they just run out of antidotes, there's a lot of opportunity for poison conditions disadvantages to cause some real problems with all of the combats and everything that has to be done. Now, I do kind of expect that there would be part 1 and part 2 where there's a long rest in between, but even then, there's a lot of poison potential, and I expect that that is going to cause the death of at least one of the party members. And since they're level 2, there's no revivify, so that's just the end. Now, let's talk about individually the parts. So level 1, when they go to the Redwood Grove for the very first time, I think that part is actually really well designed. I really quite like it, and every combat that happens there feels like it's supposed to be like unique and kind of on its own, because there's no real reason for any of the other denizens or monsters that are in that area to join a combat. They're just gonna kind of watch it. Maybe the Dryad will care, but like everything else is a bug or an undead, and they're just not really going to give two shits about what's happening because they're just not really wanting to fight. But that breaks down once they enter the lair, because once they get into the lair, yeah, the entrance of the lair has the first council member and he can kind of fight and you can convince him. That's fine if you want to run it that way. But when they get past the council member and they encounter the elves, they're going to have some type of combat or conversation that should travel throughout the rest of the lair because it's all open. And yeah, sound dampening from branches and roots going into the lair would exist, but sound is still going to echo and sound is still going to be heard. And I think it's a bit unrealistic that the combat that potentially happens at the front of the lair would not draw the attention of one of the minions of Sunset is Nigh, which is the name of the dragon. Now, once that's said and done, I think the dragon fight is still going to be really difficult. There's poison conditioned areas, there's difficult terrain in that, so there's lots still of places where poison is going to be applicable. But if they survive that, the players will get some really good loot, including a Dragon Slayer, and I have no idea how that's going to play out when I run the rest of these adventures, so I'm curious to see the overall impact of that. Now, the one thing I'll say here, and this might just be my opinion, but when you look at the map for the lair, there does appear to be a misprint, because where the map has the information of the Dragon's Hoard, like on the actual map, they labeled that as something else, and so I think there's a bit of an error there in the book, and that's something that I just wanted to call out because it confused me for a little bit, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, and that's a printing error, and they just labeled the sections wrong. All in all, though, I think this will be a really fun campaign. I think it'll be a really fun adventure that my players will enjoy going on, but like I said, at least one of them's gonna die. Now, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go away and I'm gonna go run this adventure, and the next time you see me, I'll have run it and I'll be back to tell you what my players thought and what I actually thought after having run this adventure. So I just finished running Death at Sunset, got a haircut, set up the camera, and here we are. Now, before I talk about what I loved, what I hated, and what I'll probably tweak when I run this session again, and I will be running this again, let's talk about the party that I ran it for and roughly about how long the session took. Because the party that you run it for will have massive implications on how long the adventure will run, as well as how the adventure will play out overall. For example, my party was 4 very experienced Dungeons & Dragons players, 2 of whom were Dungeon Masters who had run both 5e and 5.5 games. And that adds a level of complexity and additional experience to the player side that I may or may not have been prepared for going into it. And I bring that up because if you're not running it for Dungeon Masters, your experience is going to be vastly different, especially if you're running for new players or players who have only ever played a previous edition of the game. So, the party itself consisted of a red Dragonborn Wizard, a blue Dragonborn Cleric, an Aasimar Barbarian, and an Elvish Rogue, all of which make up a well-rounded party, and they worked really well together. However, having 2 Dragonborns in the party did turn some of the more difficult fights at level 1 and level 2 into less difficult fights because they had access to their breath weapons, which let them deal a lot more damage than perhaps the designers were expecting at level 1 and level 2. That said, even though they dealt more damage, if the Aasimar had not had racial healing abilities, this whole adventure would have ended in a TPK. And so my expectation is that even if your party is well-rounded and are working well together, if you don't have at least 2 people who can heal, they're all gonna die. All right, so Death at Sunset took roughly 4.5 to 5 hours to run, with about a half-hour break between the level 1 portion and level 2 portion of the adventure for leveling up and just getting the wiggles out and so that we could refocus. Now, the first section took roughly 2.5 hours to do all of the exploration, combat, talking, and roleplay, all of that jazz. Level 1 took a decent bit longer, actually, than the level 2 portion, which took only about an hour and a half for us to get through. But that's because my players did some shenanigans because there wasn't enough information in the book to tie the 2 sections together really well and to keep them fully separated. So if you don't have experienced players, you can expect level 1 to take a bit longer, level 2 should take a bit longer, and that level up might take long enough that you might want to just call it for the day and do this out in 2 sessions. But if you're fine running a 5 or 7 hour session, you'll probably be fine. So let's talk more in depth about level 1, what I liked, what I didn't like, and what I thought about the whole design overall. Now, getting the session started was very, very easy. Getting the player characters introduced, forcing them to work together, all of that went smoothly. But the second they got to Redwood Watch, as players do, they just went completely off script. And so while they talked to the councilman and the councilwoman, they bit the wrong councilman's advice, and they assumed that there was no actual dragon interference. So instead of considering that the old woman had concerns that there was a dragon in the area, they went off to the missing councilman's house and said, we'll go investigate that for clues. Now, this is fine, and it worked out really well, but there's no information about the councilman's house in the book. So all of this had to be created on the fly going forward. Now, because the book does provide some rumors that the players might find if they talk to some villagers around, I was able to throw some of those rumors into some paperworks in the councilman's office, and they were able to find those, so they didn't go completely blind, but they talked to no one else in the village about what was going on. So all they had was 2 rumors from 2 papers on the missing councilman's desk. And this was fine. My players were experienced, they could figure out anything that was going on, but because they didn't talk to anybody, they missed out on a lot of information. They also never found out that the merchant had healing potions, which again, probably not that big a deal because they're level 1 players and they don't have any additional gear other than what they start with, so they probably didn't have enough gold to actually buy a healing potion for everyone, but they could have pooled their gold and maybe got 1 or 2 healing potions after they had done the level 1 section where you get some additional gold. But the thing is, they never talked to her, so they never knew, and that's fine. They did talk to the cook though, Fergus, who was able to give them a little bit more information, but basically they made a donation, got some rabbit legs, and headed off to Redwood Grove. Now, like I said, level 2 is where this adventure kind of starts to fall apart for me, and it has everything to do with the information you're given about the lair. For example, you are given the heights of the ceilings of the lair. There's a 60-foot portion and 40-foot portions, which is great. Like, we know there's an ancient dragon in there, it's got to have enough space to move around. But what they don't tell you is how deep the damn lair is, which causes some real issues when you don't know the actual distance between where the players are entering the lair to where the other 4 elves that got taken and are camped out actually are. And so you've got this weird, how come the councilman doesn't know what happened to the other elves when maybe there's only 100 feet between the 2? What do you mean you haven't heard them walking around or you can't hear them talking? That doesn't make any sense. But there's also no information about, oh, actually it's 500 or 600 feet away, so it's really deep in there and he just doesn't know. And because of that ambiguity, I just threw out a number. I said, yeah, there's probably about 100 feet. In hindsight, I should have thrown out a bigger number, and I didn't. But that's okay. Now you can know, use a bigger number. Because with 100 feet, my player said, oh, okay, not a problem. Let me send in our wizard familiar. And when they sent in the wizard familiar and then made some excellent persuasion rolls of the wizard familiar monkey to try to pull on a spear and get these elves to come investigate what's going on closer to the entrance, they succeeded. And when they succeeded, the elves were able to be talked into going home and they put their trust in the party. Now, because my party doesn't apparently talk to villages or NPCs that don't have names or funny voices, they didn't talk to these elves, and so they didn't learn that there was a vial of acid that could have been thrown at either the right-hand man of the dragon itself or at the dragon, which would have aided in their fight against them and made the combat significantly easier. But they didn't know that. And it's the lack of information about the actual size of this lair that causes what I think are some real concerns with running this as written. Because the lair, as described in the book and with the map as shown, as you can see on the screen, is just too damn small. And I think things don't make sense for the amount of combats that are actually meant to be run in this section. So let's talk about that. Now, as designed, this lair is just too damn small, and there is no possible way that when the players get into the lair and encounter the hidden elves, if you don't do what I did, that the fighting would not be noticed throughout the entirety of the lair. Because yeah, even though the walls are made of soft dirt and roots of plants, that sound is still going to travel. Steel on steel is going to make a loud, piercing noise, and it's going to alert everyone within. And sure, maybe the dragon and his henchmen don't care about the elves that they've convinced to guard their lair. Maybe they don't, and they probably wouldn't. But if enough death cries happen, or if things get suspiciously quiet after that fight because the elves leave, well, then the Yuan-ti probably is going to come and investigate. And if she comes and investigates, it triggers a fight that is much more complicated and much more deadly because she is a spellcaster, and at level 1, she can deal a lot of damage. Now, if you run the Yuan-ti Malison as designed, she has a snake pit and can cast suggestion twice a day, which, by the design and layout of the lair map, it really seems like the designers want you to use suggestion to get one or more of the players into the snake pit.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
And if they end up in that snake pit, that player will die. There are 9 different snakes in that snake pit, all of which will get a turn and attack. And if even 4 of them hit, that's pretty much going to spell the end of that character. And it spelled the end of my elven rogue, who got suggested to go find something down in there. They didn't know there were snakes, and they walked into that pit. And then they got bitten a lot and just died. It's not very fun for the player, but that does seem to be the intention. Now, technically, suggestion cannot force a player character to do something if they know that it will cause them harm. You can get around that real easy by suggesting that they stand at the pit and just kind of stand still, maybe see what they can see down in it, and then have the Yuan-ti shove them into the pit. You get the same result regardless. And this Yuan-ti kind of seems like it comes out of nowhere. I mean, there's no signposting, there's no additional information that just comes out. Especially if your players are like mine and don't talk to NPCs, there's no way for them to know that this Yuan-ti even exists. Which is crazy because at this point in time, she is the boss. I mean, I know she serves Sunset is Nigh and the Dragon Wormling is technically in his lair, but right now she's way stronger, and with her multi-attack of Poison Rays and her bite attack that does piercing and poison damage, she is a force to be reckoned with at level 1. And if she rolls 1 critical, she's wiping the floor with the entire party, which is what happened to me. Actually, I rolled 2 crits, both on her Poison Rays, and both at the cleric who happened to go after the rogue who ended up in the snake pit, because he didn't see that the Yuan-ti was there. He just knew that his party fell into a pit and then screamed a lot and then died. And then the cleric rounds the corner and boom, boom, and he's also down. And that would have been the end of this encounter. Sunset is Nigh would have done absolutely nothing, and this Yuan-ti would have slain the rest of everyone else if the Aasimar did not have racial healing abilities, which is why I made mention earlier, you need 2 healers really for this adventure if you're going to run it brutally and as kind of intended. So yeah, she's the boss. And she was a hell of a fun time to run as an enemy. But when she finally went down, Sunset is Nigh had to get involved, and he was a lot of fun to run. Now, while the Yuan-ti is whooping the ass of everyone in the party, the dragon Sunset is Nigh is just chilling inside the poison miasma and his mother's skeleton watching it happen. And I made the dragon be already in the initiative order, and so anytime his turn came up, he wasn't leaving the miasma, and no one was getting close enough to the skeleton or miasma to make his breath attack worthwhile. But he was insulting the player characters. And so I got this additional roleplay of the dragon and his arrogance and his grossness towards anything that was not dragon that I got to bring out into this fight. And that was all fun and good until the Aasimar brought the cleric back up, because that's when the tide of battle began to change slightly. Because once that happened, the Yuan Ti realized, hey, I probably can't fight Hoard at level 2 adventurers on my own. So let me go over to my boss and hang out in the Poison Miasma and maybe get a little bit of cover and some help over there. So when she gets over there, then the dragon, Sunset is Nigh, is able to use its breath weapon and deal some additional damage, and then maybe get in there with a claw or two, depending on how close the people are willing to get into that miasma. But if you don't have ranged characters, they have to get in there, because the skeleton should provide some cover, especially when you consider the poison miasma is going to lightly obscure anything else in that area. Now there's a way to get around it, and if you have a wizard, you can cast spells, and so my players were able to make pretty short work of the dragon once the Yuan Ti was down. But in that whole fight, of which I consider the Yuan Ti being the big boss and the dragon kind of being the minion, I was able to kill the rogue in the snake pit. I dropped the cleric from the Yuan Ti, the Aasimar brought them back up, and then during the final fight with the dragon, I also dropped the wizard. If the Aasimar had not had healing abilities, the Yuan Ti would have absolutely 100% wiped the floor with this party, and then the dragon would have laughed as they died. Now, once the boss fight was really ended, and the real boss fight also ended, things kind of fell apart a bit, because that's not the end of this lair. And after 5 hours of Dungeons and Dragons and slaying the dragon, why on earth would you want to fight a giant centipede and a swarm of insects? Newsflash, you wouldn't. And even if you think you might, you don't, because that's anticlimactic. Killing the boss is supposed to be the end. And in this lair, as designed, it is not. Not to mention the fact that you have a section of blights that there's no reason to go and hunt down, because there's no loot over there. And so yeah, okay, you've killed the dragon, you're gonna follow the trail of gold leading to its hoard and get the treasure there. You're not gonna turn the corner, see a bunch of dead shrubs and go, I wonder what's in this section, and then walk in there and get attacked by some angry shrubbery and a strangling vine. That's just not what's gonna happen. And if it does happen, I mean, it could be kind of funny as like a, oh, I killed the dragon, but then I died to a tree kind of way, but it's still very not fun for me as the DM, or I would imagine for most players, to just have the full climactic part of the adventure ruined by the fact that you failed a roll against a twig blight. That doesn't seem like fun. Now, overall, I really liked the level 2 portion of this, but I do think the lair needs some major tweaks. I think the lair needs to be expanded, and the position of the boss and the Yuan Ti need to be moved so that they are the last possible things that you fight inside this lair. Take those blights and the centipedes and move them forward, and then throw some gold in there as a trap so that when the players walk in there to pick up that gold, the trees and the centipede attack, and then you actually get a worthwhile combat that will help whittle down some of those resources. Now, you can make these changes on your own, no problem, but if you want a map just given to you, let me know in the comments below and I'll create one and throw it up on my Patreon. Otherwise, you can tweak it to your heart's desire, and then you'll have a much better run session for this part of the adventure. Now, the dragon's hoard itself was actually pretty solid. They got a decent amount of coinage and gold, as well as some really neat magic items that would appear in a low-level dragon's hoard. But the thing that I'm concerned about is the fact that the players get Leaf Warden, the long sword dragon slayer that originally slew Sunset is Nigh's parent, Death at Sunset, 100 years ago. Now, I think it's probably fine if you're running these as one-shots or thrown into your own campaign, and just, whenever you encounter a dragon, they have a dragon slayer sword. That makes sense, it's probably fine. But if you're running this as a full campaign like I am very curious to see how Leaf Warden will affect the rest of these adventures, because having a dragon slayer sword will make things a little bit easier when it comes to the final fights. Now, Now overall, I really liked this adventure. It had dungeons, it had dragons, it had really good roleplay, and I really enjoyed the dangers of the final boss fight with Sunset is Nigh and the Yuan Ti Malison. I thought this was great. Now, when I run this again, will I make some tweaks? Absolutely. Do I think you should make the tweaks that I've suggested because I think they will make it more fun? Absolutely. But all in all, even if you change absolutely nothing, I still think this adventure is an 8 out of 10. So that's a good start. If you're wondering, should I buy this book? For the first adventure alone, if you want to get your friends into this hobby for a level 1, level 2 adventure, or if you run level 1, level 2 adventures at a local game store, I think this is a perfect way to get people into the hobby. And I will absolutely be running this one again for the next time I run new players. So thank you to my patrons who support my work, and a huge thank you to my wife who directs me behind the camera and also edits these videos. If you guys liked this review, hit the like button, subscribe for more, and if you're watching this in the future, probably click on the playlist somewhere over here so that way you guys can get a review of all of the adventures in this book. That being said, guys, I'm Sir Pinkbeard. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.